Thank you. Well, it's a great honour to join such a distinguished panel at a very important conference on security threats that we face. I am a member of the House of Commons Intelligence and Security Committee. That has responsibility for scrutinising the intelligence services, and that means we have access in our reports and investigations to highly classified intelligence material. And today, whilst I'm not speaking on behalf of the Intelligence and Security Committee, I am going to focus on our most recent report that we've published, and that is on the threat posed by China to the United Kingdom's interests. The chair of the highly influential Joint Intelligence Committee told us, quote, "There is a global values struggle in which China is determined to assert itself as a world power." The UK's close relationship with the United States, our thriving and successful science and research sector, and the perception of us as a global opinion former make us of interest to the Chinese state, probably just below its high priority targets. We concluded in the report we published just a few weeks ago that China's ambition to become a technological and economic superpower on which others are reliant poses some significant risks for the United Kingdom. China seeks to influence elites and decision makers, and it also works to acquire intellectual property and research using covert and overt methods to provide a shortcut to economic success. Its laws enable it to co-opt Chinese organizations, businesses, and citizens, whether willingly or unwillingly. They can be co-opted into the Chinese state's espionage and interference activities. China seeks technological supremacy, and it is clear, according to the work of the ISE, both its recent report and its previous work on Huawei, that we are already too reliant on Chinese technology. China's state intelligence apparatus is almost certainly the biggest in the world, and it targets the United Kingdom prolifically and aggressively. China, we concluded, has successfully penetrated every sector of the UK's economy. And China routinely oversteps the boundary between influence and interference, seeking, for example, to penetrate our universities and academic institutions, not only for research purposes, but to try to advance its international narrative and to mute criticism of the Chinese Communist Party. We concluded that the resource currently dedicated by the UK to the China security risk is inadequate. Policies and strategies to address China concerns have gone forward, but too slowly. We felt that the UK is in many ways playing catch-up on this issue. For example, the United States has some time ago identified a list of sensitive technologies where engagement with China is regulated and restricted. The United Kingdom so far has not done this. We feel as a committee that that was a serious failure, and the impact of that may be felt for years to come. It's urgent that these kinds of initiatives go forward. Another problem we identified is that security responsibilities have been devolved across government. There are a number of Whitehall policy departments who now have responsibility for tackling more overt threats from China. For example, the DFE's relationship with universities and the Department of Business and Trade in relation to business. But we feared as a committee that they don't have sufficient security expertise, resources or knowledge to carry out those responsibilities as effectively as is needed. And we also highlighted that at the moment they're not subject to proper parliamentary scrutiny because the remit of the intelligence and security does not apply to them. This is a serious failing which we ask the government to correct. Another concern we've highlighted as vitally important is that the government needs to take a more longer-term approach on this. A long-term strategy should be followed on China, and we need to see opposition parties also concurring with that. This is too important an issue to play politics with. In the past, I fear in this country that sometimes Chinese money was too often accepted with few questions asked. The economic benefits of engagement with China were felt to be the most important. Now this has started to change, particularly in the era since the COVID outbreak. There's been much more of a focus on the security issues in addition to the prosperity and economic development issues. Now, to be honest, the balance between security and prosperity requires real dexterity. Of course, we're going to be trading with China and engaging with China on economic matters. That is inevitable. And there are difficult trade-offs to be made. But the government needs to get its house in order to ensure that security concerns aren't continuously trumped by economic interests and that security concerns are given appropriate weight. Now, as I started by saying, the UK's science and research is world-leading and world-beating, and it is the source of considerable interest from China. And I'm afraid the UK's universities provide what we described in our report as a rich feeding ground for China to achieve influence and economic advantage over our country. We were particularly concerned that at the time of writing there was no single point of contact for universities seeking advice on China. China has often acted in plain sight in the context of universities, benefiting their military through research projects with UK universities that have dual use. It is a concern expressed by the committee that universities are not sufficiently alive to the threat posed by, for example, the obligations in many research contracts and agreement to transfer information, data, and intellectual property to China. We fear that the ball is being dropped because of transfer of important responsibilities on security to policy departments without fully understanding the need to tackle it. This means that China is on hand to collect and exploit the achievements of the UK's best and brightest researchers and scientists, and the fear is that the government's knowingly letting this fall through the cracks. We need swift and decisive action to prevent the nightmare scenario where China steals blueprints, sets standards and builds products, exerting political influence at every step. This is a serious commercial challenge, but it's also a threat to liberal democratic values, as Matt Pottinger has so ably outlined in the video we've just seen. And finally, just a word or two on the UK's nuclear sector and the involvement of the company China General Nuclear. It's wrong that ministers at the moment apparently look at nuclear investments on a case-by-case basis without taking on board the overall picture right across the sector. We felt it was obfuscatory for ministers to say that the investment by China General Nuclear in Hinkley C was okay because EDF would operate the facility, when the government actually knew that China expected Hinkley investment to lead to CGN going on to operate the Bradwell B facility. So one of the conclusions of our report is that the government should review the involvement of CGN in the UK's nuclear sector. So I want to conclude by returning to that quote with which I started. There is a global values struggle between China and the West, and I'm sure this conference will provide important insight into how we approach that values struggle and promote our values of liberal democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. Thank you. Wonderful.